So we're here to explore emotions and just see what's alive for you around even that question. It's called emotional freedom. Let's for now just forget the freedom part, but emotions, anger, sadness, grief, frustration, fear. Shame is not exactly an emotion, but it's close enough. We can include that. So, and in doing this investigation, we honor the tender parts of ourselves. Because for some of us, emotions run deep, so deep that we may not even have um, the willingness or that there's no readiness to turn toward them. It just feels like too much or too deep or too overwhelming. So those would be maybe emotions that are hiding out in the shadows of our experience, not completely in our conscious awareness, and honoring those parts of our experience as well. Because there's potential there, potential to be seen, potential to be met. So emotion comes from, pretty sure it's the Latin word that means to move. It's a movement, and it's a movement of energy. Ultimately, that's all an emotion is. And I don't say that to in any way trivialize our emotions at all. But in the essence of it, it's, well, even that, it's less than just a movement of energy, but it's helpful to know that it's a movement. It's just a simple movement of energy in the body. Or for some of us, a lack of movement, a shutdown. So it's energetic in our nervous systems. So if you felt something in your body, in your nervous system, and your mind was not able to think, no history, no story, no narrative around it, no young one, no other person who's making you mad, none of that. There's just a movement of energy in you. And then, of course, we have thinking minds, we have histories we bring into the present, we have stories about our inner experience and our outer experience. So when we add in the mental part, the story, the narrative, the beliefs, the shoulds and shouldn'ts, it should have been different. That's when it starts to be called an emotion, and there might be some sense of it feeling stuck in you or repetitive. The same thing keeps coming back. And it comes back in a powerful way to the extent that you may not even know what to do with it. And if that's the case, if there's a story, if there's an emotion that's stuck in some way, that keeps coming back, that you can't seem to bring the right tools to, or it just doesn't change for you, that means there is this movement of energy in the body, and there's some kind of repetitive story going on, whether you realize it or not. And not that there's anything wrong with that at all, no. It's just to bring an understanding like, this is what's happening here. In fact, it was very illuminating for me in the early stages of my path to realize how much of that repetitive mind was going at a subtle level in a way that I didn't even realize until I looked at it. But it had been there a long time. This was, it's probably, well, at least 20 years ago. So before that, I had been living my life not being very happy and not knowing why. And then all of a sudden, I realized the extent of the stories that were running around in my mind, that it was a big wow moment for me. So, point being, to begin, and this will come in its own time, but just begin to recognize the subtle stories that may be operating in you that keep your emotions stuck. Like fear is an example. So if there's a lot of worry and fear project out into the future, outcomes that that might be negative, or that you don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm anxious about what this could happen or that could happen. Or does that feel familiar to anyone, that way of thinking? Yeah. That means there's fear in the body. So the freedom begins to come into this whole system when we, first of all, we can see what's going on, the thought patterns, and then this emotion going on in the body, this feeling, sensations in the body. So we understand, that's what's going on. And then we have room, we have choices, we have space for a new way of being with that experience. And one is take some breaths. Another is to feel the sensations in the body. Bring your attention to be curious about that energy moving in the body. And then miraculously, as you do that, you realize, I'm not even paying attention to this story. So recognizing that an emotion is a movement of energy that we experience as physical somehow in the body. And it could be shut down or frozenness, that's included. And then a story in the mind. And nothing wrong with having that story in the mind at all. Because it can be, and this is like a different track here, that could be an indication that there's some pattern that developed in you early on in life that needs some attention, some early trauma pattern. And I use the word trauma very generally, not as a diagnosis, but as challenging things that happen in our childhoods that land in us in a way that we congeal around a certain emotion or belief system or body experience. And in a lot of that, it's an avoidance of emotions. Part of the origination of early trauma patterns is that we didn't have the safe holding space to feel our emotions. We're emotional beings. That's just normal as humans. We're built to react. We have emotions. We have movement of energy in the body. It's how we're built. And if something happens, say when you're 3, and there's a movement of emotional energy in the body and a story and a upset about that, and no space for that to be released and met and held by someone else, we're left very young, not having any clue as to what to do with all this energy in our bodies. And for many of us, it shuts down or goes into the shadows, or we go into our heads, or I'll talk about that in a moment. Lots of things can happen. So the more direct route to freedom from an emotional experience in the moment is to recognize that there's a story running, leave that be, and come in and breathe and feel the sensations in the body. That helps you to ride the wave of an emotion. And sometimes we want to do the exploration of, where does this emotion come from? This pattern that's stuck in me, that's repetitive over decades. So it's two different approaches, let's say. So this experience of not knowing what to do with our emotional energy, let's say when we're young, can have a huge impact on us. Because if we don't feel safe feeling our emotions, we do something to avoid them. So there's no option that they just go away. They may be shut down, but they don't just go away. Like that's just not one of the options. Emotions need attention and space for release. So if they don't have that attention, if we don't have that attention and safe space, and then we somehow avoid our emotional experience, how do we do that? Well, internally, we'll separate that by internally and externally. Internally, we go into our heads, thinking, thinking, thinking. Some of us, we shut down, we dissociate, we go into a fog, we get confused. Like if someone keeps saying to me, I'm confused, I have this confusion. I mean, to be confused about something is one thing, but this perpetual confusion is an indication that there's an unexplored emotion. A lot of thinking, some of us are thinking types, I'm one of them. That's an indication that there's unexplored emotion, probably fear, maybe other things. If there's shame, there's an unexplored emotion. Some of us go into perfectionism, organizing. Everything has to be perfect and organized. And there's nothing wrong with that. I love organization. But if there's pressure behind it and a need and it's done obsessively, then that's an indication of an unexplored emotion. Our natural state is ease and flow. And if there's anything that is in the way of that, or we don't experience that, there's something to be looked at. And not that ease and flow are right and emotions or stuckness is wrong. No. It's just how life in the human experience flows. Some of us internalize emotions so much that we get sick. The body can only take so much before it breaks. Then there are probably other ones that I'm not thinking of in the moment, and the outward expression of avoiding our emotions, addiction, compulsive behavior, over socializing, over busyness. For some of us, sleep. That's certainly not mine, but maybe some people, things get too emotional, just check out and go to sleep. or we go to sleep in other ways by shutting down, by too much being on our screens, by and what we call a formal addiction. At the root of every addiction is the fear of exploring emotions that are present. And once those emotions are uncovered and met with love, care, acceptance, openness, there's no need for that. The thread of that behavior may run through a little bit because of it, the habit of it. It's just not needed anymore. So what I find, and again, in our own time, with our own process, really bowing to our own readiness and where we are with that and respecting that, the sanity comes from turning toward our emotions. They're there anyway. And it might sound paradoxical, but there's a freedom in that when we turn toward our emotions, even though it's scary and we're afraid we're going to cry forever and we don't know what to do and maybe it feels badly for a while. There's still a freedom in that because there's no freedom in avoiding. If you avoid, it just keeps running, nipping at your heels. And maybe you know that experience in your own life. You're shut down, you're less than you know you can be, you know, however that shows up for you. So I'm going to say that my primary message today is to invite you in your own time again to turn toward your emotions and make the space to welcome them lovingly, because that's what they want and need. That's where the freedom is. And it's not immediate, 1 second, done. No, it's a process. We have to learn how to do it. We have to get comfortable with it. But the more we engage in this uh, interesting exploration inside, the less strength our emotions are going to have in a way that's not functional in our lives. So say you have a dynamic with someone and you get triggered and angry, right? The more you know has nothing to do with the other person. The more you know about your own anger, the more familiar you are with it, the more you know how to breathe with it and hold it, you know where it comes from. It's all like known to you. Then you're right poised to not react in that same way again. And that's possible. I've been there. I used to be reactive. Now I feel angry, but it doesn't like leak into an escalating argument or anything like that. It used to. So the invitation is to turn in and just go, okay, I'm going to meet you. And in that, bringing along your openness that we talked about in the beginning here, like, oh, you might think you know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. You may be very surprised when you turn inward. And you may not be. I don't know. We don't know. And we do this exploration in a pace that feels right for you. It's called dosing. You take the doses that you can handle. Maybe going a little bit outside your comfort zone, but not so much that you go into overwhelm. When we're doing this exploration of emotions, we can go into overwhelm, but we want to pull away from that. It doesn't help to actually be with the emotion when it just floods us. it does that sometimes. And then we want to do grounding things. We don't want to continue the exploration in that moment. We want to go outside and walk in bare feet on the ground and look at the sun and touch things and bring ourselves into the present moment with our senses. And then when we're stabilized again, we go into the emotion a little bit more. One thing that can happen, and I hear this quite often as we begin this exploration, the young parts of ourselves can't receive our loving attention. So we start to learn like, oh, okay, I can be here with my emotions and I can sit here and welcome. And then the young parts are just completely shut down and not ready to receive that loving care. And you might want to check in. Is that part of your experience that like you're doing all the right stuff, so to speak, and it just still feels stuck to some degree? It takes a while if there are very shut down parts of ourselves that haven't had a lot of love and care and compassionate holding. It takes a while for them to trust that this is for real. Like you can't just turn once and go, okay, I'm ready to accept and welcome. It has to be over and over, a lifestyle, a consistent way of being. And with no goal in a way, like we might think, oh, the goal is to feel the emotions and find our inner wholeness. It's just a way of being in the moment that honors our wholeness. And it's how, and bringing in the non-dual teaching, this is what consciousness is always doing. This, 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 as it is, no interpretation.